7 states, 40 million people, and a single shrinking river are staring down a $6 billion problem. And honestly, the answer we're coming up with might already be useless. Right now, there's a bunch of desperate, last-minute ideas on the table to keep the American Southwest from completely running out of water. We're talking about recycling literally every single drop of wastewater in Los Angeles, or building a massive desalination plant down in Mexico and piping fresh water back over the border. The costs are insane. The engineering is wild. It's easily one of the most ambitious things we've ever tried to do. But nobody is saying the most important part out loud. This crisis wasn't actually caused by a drought. It was caused by a math mistake made with pencils and paper over 100 years ago. A massive miscalculation that promised way more water than the river ever actually had to give. We've been letting that debt compound for a century. And now, the bill is due. There's a number etched right into the concrete of Hoover Dam that proves it. And no amount of money is going to wipe it away. So the real question isn't whether a $6 billion plan can save Lake Mead. It's whether these are actually rescue plans, or just the most expensive engineering projects in history, designed to document a total collapse. The whole mess started on November 24th, 1922. It wasn't a natural disaster. It was just a meeting. 7 guys representing 7 states sat down in a hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, to sign a document they thought would tame the American West forever. They called it the Colorado River Compact. Looking back, it was a masterpiece of misplaced confidence. They took river flow measurements during what turned out to be an incredibly wet period, and based on that, they divided up 15 million acre-feet of water per year. It was a clean, simple number meant to fuel the growth of places like Los Angeles, Phoenix, Denver, and Las Vegas. It turned deserts into farmland and powered the biggest dams in the world. There was just one problem. The number was completely wrong. And it wasn't a small mistake. It ruined the foundation of everything. Scientists now know that if you look at the long history of the Colorado River system, it really only produces 12 to 13 million acre-feet of water in a normal year. The 1922 compact allocated water that literally didn't exist. It wrote checks the river could never cash. For decades, nobody noticed because Lake Powell and Lake Mead acted like giant bank accounts, storing the extra water from wet years to cover the shortages when things got dry. But we never stopped pulling water out, and the math eventually caught up with us. Every single year, the lower basin states of Arizona, California, and Nevada legally take about 1.5 million acre-feet more water out of the system than nature puts back in. Water managers call this a structural deficit. It's an overdraft built right into the system's DINA, like a time bomb set a century ago. Now that bomb is going off, because the bank accounts are almost empty. Lake Mead, which is the country's largest reservoir and the absolute lifeblood of the Southwest, is barely holding on. Right now, its surface sits at around 1,040 feet above sea level. Full is 1,229 feet. The reservoir isn't just low, it's entering a completely new state of physics, where the remaining water is controlled by a few brutal numbers. Every single one of them is a deadline or a failure point. The first big warning sign happens at 1,035 feet. That's not the bottom, but it's where things get dangerous. At that height, the water pressure isn't strong enough to protect the huge turbines inside Hoover Dam from something called cavitation. As water rushes through the turbine blades, the sudden drop in pressure creates tiny bubbles of vapor that instantly collapse with massive force. These are basically miniature explosions that shred solid steel. It's like a cancer for the machinery. The dam's older turbines will have to be shut down completely, not to save water, but just to keep the machines from tearing themselves apart. Jordi Fuentes from the Arizona Power Authority has been pretty blunt about this. Hoover's power generation is going to take a massive hit, making the electricity it does produce way too expensive for the farms and cities that rely on it. At 1,035 feet, Hoover Dam stops being a power plant and just becomes a monument. And the lake is only 5 feet away from that number today. The next drop is 950 feet, which is minimum power pool. At this point, cavitation doesn't even matter anymore because the water is simply too low to reach the turbines. The generators go completely silent. The dam that basically defined American ambition in the 20th century goes dark, turning into a concrete relic holding back a dying lake. But the final number is the one that should terrify everyone. 895 feet. Dead pool. This is the exact elevation where the lowest water outlets at Hoover Dam are exposed to the open air. Gravity completely fails here. Water can no longer flow downstream to the farmers in California's Imperial Valley, or to the cities in Arizona, or to Mexico. At 895 feet, Hoover Dam isn't a dam anymore. It's just a 726-foot-tall concrete wall blocking a dry canyon, holding back a stagnant puddle of water we can't even reach. For the Central Arizona Project, which is the 336-mile canal keeping Phoenix and Tucson alive, 895 feet is the end of the line. The canal's intake sits high up on the lake, so long before the river hits dead pool, that intake will be left high and dry. The system serving millions of people just turns off. This is the ultimate consequence of that original sin in 1922. It's the final correction to a century of bad math, and it's exactly what every water manager, politician, and farmer has been dreading. Well, except for one city. One city actually saw 895 feet coming and spent over $1 billion to build a way out. Las Vegas has always known how fragile its existence is. It's a city built on spectacle in a basin that gets maybe 4 inches of rain a year. Surviving there was a miracle of engineering from day one. As Lake Mead started its steady 20-year drop, the people running the Southern Nevada Water Authority decided to do something incredibly bold. They chose to prepare for the absolute worst-case scenario. They planned for dead pool. Their general manager, John Ensminger, realized the city's old water intakes wouldn't work at all once the lake got near 900 feet. So they proposed a third intake, which people called the third straw. But they didn't just make it a little deeper. They drilled it into a spot that seemed completely impossible. They went through 3 miles of solid volcanic rock, hundreds of feet under the lake bed, all the way down to 875 feet. That's 20 feet below dead pool. It was an act of pure desperation that cost $5 billion and took 7 years of dangerous, brutal work. A massive tunnel boring machine chewed through the dark under the weight of trillions of gallons of water. They finished it in 2015 and had the pumping station fully online by 2022. It was just in time. When the lake dropped to its lowest point in history that year, the third straw wasn't a backup plan anymore. It was the only reason the city had water. John Ensminger put it plainly when he said they invested that $1.5 billion for a reason, and that the people of Las Vegas can rest easy knowing they live in the most water-secure city in the desert Southwest. It's a wild irony. The city famous for waste and slot machines in the middle of the Mojave is now the only major city on the river that can watch Lake Mead drop past dead pool and still turn on the faucet. If the lake hits 895 feet, Phoenix starts to dry up, and Southern California hits an absolute crisis. But Las Vegas keeps right on drinking. They literally drilled their way out of the problem. But that safety is a total island. It's just a fortress in a collapsing ecosystem. For everybody else downstream, there is no tunnel deep enough. Their only choice is to find new water or make it themselves, and that's exactly why we're looking at a $6 billion price tag. For California and Arizona, the situation is completely different. They can't drill below dead pool, so they're stuck dealing with a much more expensive reality. If they want to survive, they have to start manufacturing water. The ideas they're throwing around are massive. The first one is a proposal sent to the U.S. Interior Department for that $6 billion desalination plant, in Baja California, Mexico. The concept sounds simple, but politically, it's a total nightmare. You build a massive plant on the coast of the Sea of Cortez, use a crazy amount of electricity to force seawater through membranes to remove the salt, and then build a massive network of pipelines to pump that water hundreds of miles north across an international border into Arizona's canals. In exchange for paying for the plant, Mexico would leave some of its own Colorado River water in Lake Mead for the U.S. to use. It's a massive bargain driven by pure survival. It's an admission that the river just isn't enough anymore. The costs, the energy, the headaches of building American infrastructure in another country. None of that matters compared to the fact that we are running out of options. The second $6 billion plan is staying on our side of the border. It's called Pure Water Southern California, run by the giant Metropolitan Water District. This is the other side of the coin. If you can't get water from the ocean, you start cleaning up your own drains. This project wants to build one of the biggest wastewater recycling programs in the world. The goal is to take up to 150 million gallons of treated wastewater every day, water that usually just gets dumped into the Pacific Ocean, and run it through a massive purification process until it's clean enough to drink. Then, they'll pump it into Southern California's underground basins to create a local, drought-proof water supply. That would drastically cut down on how much water Los Angeles needs to take from the Colorado River. The price tag for just the first phase is already estimated at $6.4 billion. Recycling and desalination aren't small conservation tricks. They are attempts to literally manufacture water on a massive scale, because the natural source we built the modern West around is failing. These are the giant gambles California and Arizona have to take, because unlike Vegas, they don't have an escape hatch. They are staring down that 895-foot mark with nowhere to hide. And the clock is ticking faster than anyone wants to admit. This isn't just a physical crisis anymore. It's a political emergency. The legal rules that have governed the river for 20 years are about to expire. On December 31st, 2026, the current guidelines that dictate how Lake Mead and Lake Powell operate will just vanish. If the 7 states can't agree on a new deal by then, there are literally no rules left. The fighting behind closed doors has been brutal. It's a slow-motion war between people like Tom Bushatsky, Arizona's top water official, and J.B. Hamby, California's lead negotiator. Arizona has junior water rights, meaning they get cut first when things go bad. California has senior rights, meaning they are legally allowed to take their full share, even if the lake completely empties out. It's a legal system that makes sense on a piece of paper from 100 years ago, but it's a total disaster in the real world. How do you force one state to give up everything, while another gives up nothing, when they're all drinking from the exact same dying river? The federal government has been pushing the states hard to cut millions of acre-feet of water, threatening to step in and force cuts if they don't figure it out. The states managed to put together a fragile, short-term truce to get through the next couple of years, but the deadline for a permanent solution is coming up fast. After that, we're looking at a legal void right as the reservoir hits its absolute physical limit. You can practically feel the panic at this point. The Metropolitan Water District just approved an emergency deal where the federal government is using inflation reduction funds to pay them $65 million just to not take a fraction of the water they're legally allowed to have. We are literally bribing our own water agencies to leave water in the lake just to keep the entire system from crashing. But this isn't a long-term fix. It's just triage on a battlefield. It's a $65 million Band-Aid on a massive wound just to buy a few more inches of water and a few more months to argue before the deadline hits. Meanwhile, invisible forces are making everything worse. The drought is an easy villain, but the real enemies are physics and rising temperatures. Evaporation alone steals 600,000 acre-feet of water right off the surface of Lake Mead every year. That's more than double what the entire state of Nevada is allowed to use in a year, just vanishing into thin air. It's a thief you can't negotiate with. Then there's the snowpack. For a long time, everyone just hoped for a massive winter in the Rockies to save us. But that hope is dying out. The West is warming up, and that heat is creating a massive soil moisture deficit. The ground is so incredibly dry and thirsty that when the snow finally melts, the earth drinks it up like a sponge before it ever makes it to the streams that feed the reservoirs. A good winter doesn't mean a good spring runoff anymore. The system is losing its ability to fix itself. This is the reality that no $6 billion engineering project can solve. The original math from 1922 was wrong. The climate that made it work is gone. And we're still overdrawing the river by 1.5 million acre-feet every year. We're just spending the principal on a loan that's never getting renewed. The third straw is done, so Vegas is safe for now. The big plans for desalination and recycling are still just drawings on a whiteboard, years and billions of dollars away from actually helping. The political deadline is months away, and the water level is hovering right near that hydropower cliff. The story of Lake Mead isn't about a temporary dry spell. It's a permanent reshaping of the American West. It's what happens when a civilization finally has to face the reality of its own arrogance. These massive proposals aren't just infrastructure. They are monuments to a massive miscalculation. It's an admission that the water we were promised is never coming back. At the end of the day, it's not an engineering question. It's a question of who gets saved. Las Vegas proved you can survive if you can afford to build your own lifeboat. But 40 million people can't fit in that boat. These $6 billion plans are a desperate attempt to build more room. But it might be too little, too late. The lake keeps falling, and out there in the quiet canyons, the water is moving closer and closer to that final number, 895. The number that was locked into the system a century ago,